Lanka. We then invite Lieutenant Commander K.S. Lakmal Kadigamua of the Sri Lanka Navy, and then Mr. Chaturanga Hapuarachi, the manager representing News First of the Capital Maharaja Group, Mr. Asit De Silva, the Group Senior Manager, Social Innovation, Dialogue Asiata PLC, Sri Lanka. I kindly request these panelists to come on stage for us to proceed with our panel discussion. I now kindly invite the moderator of the day's panel discussion, Dr. Chandana Sirivardhana, Senior Lecturer from the University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, to moderate the panel discussion on if Sri Lanka is tsunami ready. Dr. Chandana Sirivardhana, the floor is yours.
Aibowan from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a beautiful island blessed with breathtaking beaches with nearly 1,600 kilometers of palm fringe scenic coastline, making Sri Lanka an ideal destination for tourists worldwide. Therefore, until very recent past, tourism was one of the largest industries in the country. In 2019, the contribution of travel and tourism to GDP for Sri Lanka was 12.6. And as a result, the travel and tourism's contribution to the gross domestic product of Sri Lanka had been growing at an average annual rate of 4.28 till 2019. The fishing industry in another industry that benefiting from the sea. Sri Lanka has an annual fish production of more than 400,000 metric tons from the marine sector. According to statistics of the Ministry of Fisheries, there are around 800,000 fishing households in the 14 coastal districts of Sri Lanka. In these districts, community establishments are formed mainly around fishing and tourism industries. Furthermore, these two industries contributed more than 10% of the country's GDP. Therefore, coastal hazards, mainly to tsunamis, can pose a significant threat to the stability of these vital industries and the safety of coastal communities and its infrastructures. According to UNDRR, tsunamis are the most deadly of all sudden onset natural hazards. In 2004, the Indian Ocean tsunami killed nearly 230,000 people, making it one of the deadliest disasters in modern history. The total economic cost of damage was estimated at US $9.4 billion. In Aceh alone, the cost of damage was almost equal to its GDP in the previous year. In Sri Lanka, we lost the lives of 35,000 Sri Lankans, and also it left Sri Lanka with several 100,000 displaced and massive damage to its infrastructures and capital assets. The cost of damage was estimated at around US $1 billion, and particularly in tourism and fisheries sectors. The medium-term financing needs were estimated to be around US $1.5 billion to 1.6 billion. Experiencing this devastating damage of Indian Ocean tsunami, the entire nation came to a stop for a moment. However, this devastating disaster could not stop this strong nation, enriched with courage, determination, and with the commitment of citizens coming back better, stronger from this severe destruction. Strengthening disaster governance by introducing Disaster Management Act in 2005 and by addressing the gaps in response of establishing the Disaster Management Center in 2005. And in recent years, following the guidelines given by Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, many measures have been implemented to enhance the disaster preparedness for effective response. Furthermore, regional, national, and local corporations have been strengthened to improve the collaboration between various stakeholders, developing preparedness measures and strategies in collaboration with multiple sectors and stakeholders with knowledge, skills, and technology to reduce the damage of a future potential tsunami. In the global setting, according to UNDRR, by 2030, an estimated of 50% of the world population will be living in coastal areas. Over 700 million people will live in low-lying coastal areas and small islands in developing states exposed to coastal hazards, which include tsunamis. And tsunamis have encountered for almost 10% of economic losses over the past 2 decades, setting back development gains, especially in the countries that bordering the Indian and Pacific Ocean basins. Therefore, in order to build worldwide awareness, in 2015, the UN designated the 5th of November as the World Tsunami Awareness Day. World Tsunami Awareness Day in 2021 promoted the Sendai 7 campaign, which aims to sustainably enhance the international cooperation to developing countries through adequate and sustainable support to complement their national actions for implementation of the current framework by 2030. Furthermore, United Nations Decade for Oceans program is supporting efforts to achieve safe ocean is another initiative that aims to make communities at risk of tsunami resilient and prepared. And most importantly, in 2021, UN announced the goal of making at-risk communities 100% tsunami ready by 2030. The Tsunami Ready program shows how we work together to reduce the risk for the at-risk communities. In that context, to commemorate the International Tsunami Awareness Day, here we are bringing the panel of experts who have gained a vast experience and have played an active role in disaster risk management in Sri Lanka to one platform to benchmark our tsunami readiness in better responding to tsunamis and also capture how prepared are we to address the dual challenges of pandemic in responding tsunamis. So with that note, I would like to start with the Major General retired Sudhanta Ranasinghe, the Director General of Disaster Management Center. Sir, since the inspection of the legally mandated agents in disaster management, DMC, in 2005, you have been playing a significant role in safeguarding Sri Lanka from deadly disasters. And during the recent past years, we have noticed many measures have been taken by you to strengthen the disaster preparedness for effective response. So as the Director General of the Disaster Management Center, what are the measures you have taken and introduced to, in this process for the effective response concerning the tsunami preparedness of Sri Lanka? In summary, how ready are we for tsunamis?
Thank you. I think the subject was covered from the inception, from the start of this program. And one of my directors gave a very broad description of how the message is conveyed right down to the last mile. DMC was established in 2006, though the act was declared in 2005. So for last 15 years, DMC have been working out and analyzing, studying and making programs, planning, preparation, mitigation, then awareness, then responding and response. All these things have been done by DMC for last 15 years plus. Now tsunami, when you take as one isolated disaster, which is the most critical and most disastrous for Sri Lanka as an island nation. As I mentioned in the beginning, 14 districts right around, and the economic hub of Sri Lanka is right around. That is where we get all the dollars into the country, the coastal line, the hotels and so on. So this is where we have the living, this environmental prestige of the country, then marine life, plus the hotel sector, the economy of the country, plus most importantly, the lives of the people. And you find majority of the fisher folks, plus the hotel sector and so on and so forth. Now for this, it's kind of a centralized system with the connectivity of the international organizations from the upstream, and then down the line decentralized execution. The plans may be there, we may have 100% foolproof, proven plans, but if the message is not gone to the last man, last mile, and if the message is not being practiced down to the last man, last mile, and if the plans and preparatory activities are not being driven into those people, we will be a failure. So our main important task is to make it safer Sri Lanka, safer community, and a tsunami-ready country. For this, we have drawn up the national plan, and we have the district plan. 14 districts have their own district plans, and we have the connectivity from the international to the national, then from national to the district. And we are in the process of developing divisional and the Gram Niladhari also. So having said that, along the last 15 years, we have developed the committees, rehearsals, practices, tabletop exercises, and awareness program right down to the Gram Niladhari level. Now this is something which most of the professionals have been talking about. The tsunami focal point from the community, tsunami focal point from the Gram Niladhari level, tsunami focal point from the AGA divisional level and the district level. Plus, we have to have that institutional focal points as well. Now, in a district, we get, when you analyze, we get governmental institutions, private institutions, SMEs, and normal peasants living along the coastal line. Now, for all these communities, we have to understand and make sure that we have focal points right down to the last organization. The institutional plans has to be done by these such institutions. So the DMC as an organization must be checking, monitoring, controlling, and make sure that we put our foot down and develop our advocacy on those people and make sure that whatever we advise and guide and request from them are implemented by those organizations. Simple example, now we have district emergency plans and we have district evacuation program, and how practical these evacuation programs. Now when we come into the safety centers, the exit routes, restriction routes, closing of the area, then protection of the area, then public security, then service provision, the essential services, all these things has to be catered for well in advance. Those plans are being done and plans has to be refreshed, renewed annually at least. So it should be an annual program. So as you question, since there are a lot of speakers here, what I would say in summary, national plan is there, national SOP is there, national message conveying system is there, early warning awareness programs are there, Triforces, police programs are there, seal of plans have been implemented, but how practical these plans on the field is a problem. There are question marks in certain areas. For last 2 years, we are not practiced. I remember my last visit to Mullaitivu 2 years before, 2020. We had a large number of observations. Of course, if you do it today, we will have hundreds and thousands of observations. So you have to practice and practice and practice. Drive it into the people, drive it into the system. Otherwise, there will be a catastrophe.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive answer, sir. And as you said, it's all about, in theory, you can have many, many plans in the book, but if you don't practice at the ground level, nothing going to work. And with that, Major General Sudanta Ranasinghe explained how well prepared the national level in disseminating information and the policies has been in place. And Mr. Pradeep Kodipilly has explained the early warning process as well. But then the baton goes to the district level or to the local municipalities. So then Sendai framework highlights the importance of national level working closely with the local level, and also the local level has working as the interface between national level and the communities at risk. So I would like to move into Mr. Kitsiri, who is the additional district secretary of Gampaha district. Sir, how prepared are you to receive the message from the national level and to disseminate that information back to the communities at risk, as well as safeguarding them, and also building an awareness of the communities to better respond to these messages?
Actually, when we receive from the messages from the DMC, we have district level, our district level unit, and we send the messages directly to the divisional secretaries actually. After that, divisional secretaries disseminate those messages, the relevant authorities, especially to the Grama Niladhari. And especially divisional secretaries have a lot of officials in the village level. Grama Niladhari, Samurdhi Niladhari, Krupanisa Niladhari, and the development officer likewise. Right? Directly they responsible for the divisional secretary. So divisional secretary has systems to immediately contact those officers. So he can disseminate every information quickly. Especially we have, as the incident commander in the district, GA has lot of ways, various ways to disseminate, to give the information to divisional secretaries and the other department heads like police, army, electricity, everything. Because GA, the government agent, is the person who has the authority to coordinate every institutions in the district. So he has that power and he has that authority. He can call meetings, so anytime he can call the officials in the district. So he has that system to give those information to everyone very quickly. Then we can manage those information which are received by us from the DMC. We can manage those information likely very quickly dissemination. Yes.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Kitsiri. We can talk again in the next round. And then, not like the 2004 incident, right now we are living with a pandemic for like how many years? I forgot the count. But doctors always say prevention is better than cure. And I'm 100% sure that must be why Dr. Hemantha Herath is always working very closely and as the national coordinator of the Disaster Preparedness and Response Division of the Ministry of Health, has done tremendous amount of work in improving health sector disaster management. And also one example is the introduction of this publishing of the tsunami standard operation procedures for the health sector. And also he has been playing an active role even before the pandemic also on this health sector disaster management. And even right now, as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Health and as the spokesperson, every day he comes to the media and talks about us to be better prepared for this pandemic. And sir, my question is now today is kind of different. I would like to ask, how prepared are you for the tsunamis on top of pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Chandana. I hope the most of the activities related to the tsunami response or tsunami preparedness are being discussed. But what we are planning to do or what we are doing at the health sector is the one that I will be focusing. Basically, when the 2004 tsunami struck, at that time we were not prepared, and therefore we had so many problems, and we somehow or other managed to face the situation despite many complications and other problems that we experienced during that time. However, after a few years later, we gradually developed our capacity to respond to mass casualty events of that nature, because parallel to the tsunami, we were continuously experiencing mass casualty events of different nature as a result of the civil conflicts, but also due to other natural disasters. Through the experience that we gained during these through these activities, we finally found that better preparedness is the key for to the better response, and as a result, we developed our standard operating procedures for the tsunami response. Basically, it was not the operating procedures for the response, but to the alert or the tsunami warning, because if the hospitals are now gradually developing into a systems where the system is being gradually developed to respond to any mass casualty event, whether it is tsunami or any other thing. But what we need is we will be more focusing on tsunami warnings, because compared to the frequency of tsunami, the true tsunamis that we are going to experience, we will be getting more warnings. Every 3 to 4 years, definitely we are going to get tsunami warnings and how the health system should respond. For that, we have a very simplified system, but very complicated procedures. That is, basically, we have our health institutions, 3 categories. One, those who are going to be affected. The other is those who are going to bear the burden. Others are those who are going to support the institutions who are going to be affected or bear the burden. So the immediate thing is to get evacuated either vertically or horizontally. That is, vertically means going upstairs as much as possible, and then horizontally to go to some other distant place. And then the next step is to prepare the hospitals which are not going to be affected, but closer to the affected areas, which are the institutions that will be taking or bear the burden of the situation. So we need to support those hospitals by arranging making arrangements to strengthen their capacity. For that, those hospitals which are not likely to be affected, or those who are not going to bear the burden, will come and help. So this simple mechanism will be implemented, and we have already done few rehearsals, but we know that, as General Sudanta very correctly pointed out, we need to make sure that we have to make sure that these systems are going to be operational and then finally working, for which we need to do many rehearsals and other things in the future also. Unfortunately, because of the COVID problem, it's complicated, and this time we have been able to we usually do around 15 disaster drills every year, but this year we are going to do maximum 2 or 3 disaster drills, not more than that. And we will be having the complication of COVID pandemic, which we know that with the Disaster Management Center, we have already developed certain preparedness guidelines to how to handle the safe locations and centers. But at the same time, the hospitals itself are having their own systems to handle the COVID-19 patients, and these will be implemented to handle the victims or affected populations if they come to a hospital. So those are the basics preparedness that we have already arranged. So we hope that these arrangements will need to be tested, but at the moment we are trying our best to manage with this current arrangement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It is not one Sri Lanka only we are dealing with. It is a global pandemic, so I'm sure the things are very, very complicated. And the next gentleman might be the person who is really happy to hear that we are tsunami ready and safe from tsunamis, as well as we are battling very well against the pandemic as well. So I would like to move to Mr. Varuna Ettipola, who is the Assistant Director of Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. So Mr. Varuna, my question is, tourism sector is, as mentioned before, it's very vital for the Sri Lankan GDP of the Sri Lanka economy. But the thing is, it's a very complex industry, I guess, because you are managing international hotel chains coming up to down to homestay, single owner homestays, and then tourists are coming from different backgrounds with the different languages they are speaking, as well as their movements might be very hard to track. But at some point of time, there is a high possibility that they might be in a coastal establishment or at the beach or doing surfing or some other adventure sport. So in that case, what are the measures have you taken in order to safeguard the tourists? And it is very vital at this point of time to say to the world that we are ready for a battle against these tsunamis and everything. So over to you, Mr. Varun.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Chandana. I think tourism is a highly volatile industry, and as you mentioned, that how we can protect a tourist, right, with such disasters. It's like we have Sri Lanka Tourism. We have not done a mandate, right, even after the tsunami. So basically, but in our guidelines, we do have certain criteria. But I think, for example, if you take hotels, right now they follow their SOPs as standard operative procedures. So in that there is emergency preparedness response manuals. So all the hotels are, I think, updated. I had to mention that now there is formal and informal sector. So now if you take Sri Lanka, the formal sector, if you take it comes to nearly 25 to 30%. And the majority are the informal sector, that is 65 to 70. So these registered properties, actually they are registered to Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority. So normally when we issue a license or a renewal license, we always check whether that we check the public liability insurance. When it comes to public liability insurance, in that we cover the entire the hotel and even the staff and the guest as well. So that is a mandatory requirement in obtaining the license. And when you take the informal sector, some are, yes, they have their whatever the public liability insurance they have obtained, but only thing is when they are not in our registered category, it's unable to trace them. So as you said, most of the hotels, they have done their evacuation drills, and even the staff is already informed what needs to be done, and the rapid response teams are in place. So these things are happening, and they are following once in every year they have to do that. But I think we need our assistance from the disaster management centers and even Department of Meteorology, that in future, if we want to have a mandate for tourism, I think we need for preparedness, a disaster preparedness mandate, I think we need assistance. So currently we are, since most of the properties are, hotels properties are in the coastal line, all the new projects, what we do, we always work out with other agencies. For example, if it is a new project, we always get the assistance from the NBRO and other related agencies. So likewise, but only thing we don't have a mandate to assist the the stakeholders. So I think we need that assistance from the relevant agencies. So we are very much happy to work with other agencies, especially with the Disaster Management Center and even the Department of Meteorology and other related parties. So while having that document in future, hopefully we will do our best when it comes to to safeguard the tourists who comes and stay in this lovely island, Sri Lanka. So we want to send that message that nothing is, we have not neglected anyone. So hopefully future we will have that mandate ready. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best to work on that mandate, and with all the stakeholders, hopefully in the future we can come up with that mandate. And as mentioned previously also, just like the tourism sector, the fishing and the fisheries department plays a major role in safeguarding the fishermen and their families, and also the equipment as well as the infrastructures. So like around 800,000 fishing households are there at the moment, according to the Department of Fisheries, and 21 functioning major fishing harbors around Sri Lanka, around 900 minor fishing landing centers, and we need to protect them all, otherwise they are contributing to the national economic development. So with that, I would like to move into Mrs. Hewa Patirana, who is the Director of Operations of Department of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. Madam, I would like to ask about the preparedness of your department in safeguarding the fishing communities, because they might be not in the communication channels of receiving the information given by the national level. So then you have a huge responsibility to give them the message as well as safeguarding them. In that case, what are the measures you have been taken?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chandana. Fisheries sector is highly vulnerable to tsunami. In 2004, tsunami caused a vast damage to fisheries community and the fishery related infrastructure as well. Fisheries department is responsible for the security and the welfare of the fisher community. To fulfill this duty, we have island-wide network of covering all coastal districts. This district administration has connections with the district disaster management coordinating committee and organize the training programs and also the early tsunami warning mock drills to train the fishermen to behave according to the safe manner without be panic. So these trainings are very useful for fishermen to find the way out, avoiding the high tsunami waves. In addition, monitoring, control and surveillance unit of the Department of Fisheries has links with the Meteorology Department and the Disaster Management Center and receives the emergency alerts, and this unit passes the message to the district coordinating levels and to the ground level fisher community. In addition, monitoring, control and surveillance unit work in 24/7 basis and monitor the fishing vessels at sea using the satellite-based vessel monitoring system and the radio communication, SSB radio communication systems. And by using these systems, we are able to communicate any hazards taking place in the Indian Ocean region to the fishing vessels operate in the Eastern and Indian Ocean. So with these arrangements, now fishermen are well aware of how to behave in a tsunami. So this preparedness is very important to mitigate future damages caused by a tsunami. So in addition to that, all fishing boats and fishing gears and the crew, it is mandatory to ensure these fishing boats and gears and the crew to reduce the burden caused to the fishermen after any disaster happen. Likewise, Department of Fisheries is facilitating fishermen to face such calamities without facing many difficulties in a potential tsunami in future. So if I say more about the arrangements in the Department of Fisheries, we have a district level arrangement, not only assistant director level, but we have fisheries inspectors coordinating at divisions very close to fishermen, and the messages are passed and how to behave and how to manage the situations like tsunami. And the tsunami drills, the mock drills held by the DMC, has instructed fishermen to follow the evacuation routes to the higher elevations, following the signboards already displayed in the coastal areas. And in the meantime, with the advice of Department of Fisheries, district level officers, now fishermen know not to keep their belongings near coastal small huts, what they called wadis. And now they have developed their attitudes, they have changed their attitudes to go to higher elevated areas to be as their permanent residence. So now most of the fishermen are inhabited in the higher elevated areas, and new housing schemes have been introduced established in beyond the tsunami buffer zone. And with the lessons learned in 2004 and the acquired knowledge through the awareness programs and the mock tsunami rehearsals, now fishermen know how to behave without being panicked, how to leave the areas, and now they are ready to leave the coastal areas, unlike in the past. And this preparedness is very important to mitigate future damage caused to the fisher community in a future potential tsunami.
Thank you very much, Madam, for that very comprehensive answer. And it is great to see that you have taken many measures to safeguard the fishing communities, and also in the policy level as well as in the action level. So with that, I would like to move into a gentleman who is working closely with the Fisheries Department, Mr. Asit De Silva, who is the Senior Manager, Social Innovation Group Sustainability Dialogue Asiata company. And then we know that telecommunication industry is one of the most critical infrastructures in managing information during all phases of the disasters. However, in 2004 tsunami, we have observed that that telecommunication, even though it is a critical infrastructure, the communication has been broken down mainly because of the damages to the physical damages, as well as when handling the massive flow of information in the disaster, the capacity was not enough. Like fast forwarding 17 years from 2004 to 2021 today, how ready are you in terms of handling that capacity of information, as well as the the technological advancements happened during this time. Over to you, Mr. Asit.
Thank you, Doctor. The short answer would be we are better prepared now. If you look at from 2004 to 2021, what the development have been. So if you are to rewind back, I will just give some very basic information. And if we think through, then I think every one of us will get a better idea as to where we stand right now. 2004, if we go right back to that time period, all of us in this audience, in this panel, if you all think through, what did we use a phone for? It was only for either taking a call or maximum would be SMS message, right? Now, once we come forward from there 17 years down the line, taking that total journey, the phone, I would say the least used two services are taking a phone call and using SMSs. The rest is all on data or other mobile data related services that we consume on a day-to-day basis. And going back to 2004, as an operator, we had just slightly over 1 million subscribers. And today it's about 16.9 million, right? So it had grown. So what I'm trying to say is that with this growth, obviously the network also had grown. The technology had moved from what was used back then to now. Even in 2004, if we go back, it was, if you look at the mobile technology terms, it was like 2.5G or 3G. It was just coming out. Even social media, if we talk about, that is the time that it started slowly moving in, and in Sri Lanka, not many were using it. But today we are like knocking on the doors of 5G, right? And social media is like everywhere, right? I mean, you do something like before even the SMS reaches, sometimes you would have probably got the message via social media, and people are very well aware of whatever that is going to happen. So when it comes to telecommunication operators, they can get involved in many parts. If you are to break the involvement into three parts, like it can be in form of early warning, then during the disaster, the support it can give, and then post-disaster, in the immediate aftermath, like how they have been supporting. And if you really think about it and take the word tsunami out, from 2004 to now onwards, we have faced many other disasters. And each one of these disasters have been, so to say, a practice field for the mobile operators or the telecommunication operators, because it's only that it's not a tsunami, but there have been floods, there have been landslides where it damaged some infrastructure, and we have been able to get the networks up and running within maybe 24 hours or even less than that. So, and even in certain instances where the relief agents wanted their communication devices charged, we have made sure that they can go to our towers locations because they are always powered up with backup electricity. So simple things where they can go and plug in and recharge so that they don't have to come to areas. So likewise, we have looked at multiple potential areas where we could support at a time of a disaster, and during the period where the disaster is going on and aftermath of it, how we can come into play. So likewise, there have been so many areas, and even just to add to Madam, on the fisheries, fishing community, going beyond the normal warning, we have picked the fisher folk and projects like Sairu, where we give free warning messages to them on 828. They can dial and they can subscribe. Where these fishermen now, to date, there are like about 75,000 fishermen who have registered. And if it's a critical message, they keep getting the call till they pick it up so that they can stay away. So likewise, so there are so many advancements that's done, and it's ever changing, and the technology will change, and we'll be in a better position to support various situations, and definitely it will be better than today. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asit. So we'll talk more in the next round. And then, yes, of course, I'm also a subscriber to the Sayura, and definitely I'm also getting that critical call. If I don't pick it, they're going to call again as well. So it's a very, very good success story of two departments working together and making people safe in these disasters. When it comes to communication, we can't forget the role of so-called traditional media, because based on our surveys, we have found out that still people tend to believe the breaking news and the news alerts rather than the information that you are getting from the social media. So I'm sure, Mr. Chaturanga, you would like to come here and then be the host of the show, but today you are the panelist. And then I would like to ask from you, you have been playing a major role in disaster communication as well as educating the communities, building an awareness, and most importantly, relief and aid distributions. So please tell us more about how, like throughout the history, you have been doing this, and then how prepared are you right now for this?
Thank you, Doctor. Firstly, what we have to understand is this entire thing is to save the lives of people, right? We are all here, we are all talking about this awareness, and all this is that main point is to protect the people. So probably after the military, media also has a very strong connection with people all across the board, whether it's local, international, and at the end of the day, what we also want is to save the lives of the people. So as Mr. Asita said, from 2004 to 2021, there has been a leap of jump in terms of the technology. And here again, that applies to the media sector as well. But what we understand is, even the fact that we are here today representing News First, the private company, and service providers like Mr. Asita's company are here today for the purpose of taking this information to the general public. And that, I think, is something that my company also values. And a lot of media stations here in the country also have an understanding of how that is done. But mostly, we are, as people, depending on the technology that is available. And even if we upgrade, for example, let's say we are upgrading from a certain technology to another more advanced version, a majority of thought is put, a lot of thinking is put into the fact that we can use this to disseminate information of this nature. So that aspect is taken into consideration. So that, to keep it short and sweet, is that we are depending on technology, and when we do, we definitely think of the people, and if something of this nature arises, whether we can take that information to the people is very carefully thought out.
Very much, Mr. Chaturanga. And then he mentioned that we want to save the lives. So how can you forget the Triforces when saving the life? So that's why I kept the Lieutenant Commander Case Lakmal Kadigamuwa as the last expert and the resource person. Lieutenant Commander, I would like to know that throughout the history, the role that Triforces has been playing, we cannot forget. So they have been helping disaster management authorities in many ways, which communities or a common man cannot do. For example, they have been trained to do search and rescue operations, reaching the unreachable areas before anyone else, and especially managing the dead bodies, setting up shelters fast, and helping management of reconstruction to bring the recovery phase should be added to the list. So in that case, starting from the 2004 tsunami experience up to right now, how prepared are you to handle a tsunami if we happen today?
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandana. First of all, I want to give my sincere thanks for the Major General Sudhanta Ranasinghe sir to make this important occasion to share our knowledge. And let's see what is the naval perspective and the role and task of the Sri Lanka Navy during such kind of national level disasters. Generally, now we have 77 numbers of tsunami early warning towers which are established around the Sri Lanka, and out of these 77 numbers of towers, Sri Lanka Navy is looking after and maintaining 16 numbers of towers. After receiving warnings and the warnings from the disaster management center to these early warning towers, there are respective crew. We have appointed respective crew and officers to this each and every particular towers. So what they are doing, they are manually operating the PA system. After operating this PA system, the general community will be aware, and we can do that evacuation plans and all those things according to the SOP and National Emergency Operation Plan. So apart from that, that this notice will be go to the respective area commanders in the area. That area commanders will notify to the Coast Guard stations and the radar stations and the all other naval establishment in respective coastal belt. So in respect to that, those officers and naval staff will be notified to the community as well as fishing community. So generally, now we have established Maritime Rescue Coordinating Center in Sri Lanka Navy headquarters. What we are doing, we are operating 24 that around the clock in the MRCC. We can take all the information from the merchant ships, and we have sophisticated system to take that, like AIS, automatic identification system, and vessel monitoring systems, which is operated by DFAR, and that we have sea vision system, so we can monitor all the ships and craft and the floating objectives which are trespassing through our search and rescue region. So there are 30 numbers of search and rescue regions around the world. So we have communication with these SRRs and MRCCs. So we can take all the informations from regarding this kind of national level, international level disaster situations. So we can carry out that e-broadcastings. Apart from that, in every time, Sri Lanka Navy is operating around the Sri Lanka. There are naval vessels, naval units, more than 10 to 15 numbers of more naval units operating around our territorial waters to exclusive economic zone. Sometimes more than beyond the exclusive economic zone. So we can utilize those ships and craft to assist for the fishing community as well as the merchant ships. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Commander. And as a first-year engineering student back in 2004, I still remember, like we were there in Hambantota trying to help the communities at need, and then the role that Triforces played, especially taking the dead bodies out from this Hambantota lagoon. That experience I would never ever forget. I hope we would never ever face that experience again as well. So with that, now we have finished the first round of questions, and then I would like to open the floor to ask common questions from all the experts. That is about the importance of working together and the managing the stakeholders. Like we never know that when are we going to get the next tsunami. So it can be a daytime, it can be a nighttime. So sir, I would like to start from you. In case of if you get the tsunami warning in a night time, how prepared are we for this worst case scenario and working with the stakeholders?
Of course, it will always come in the night. We know, because bad luck, worst cases always comes at the wrong time in the worst way. So for that, as I mentioned in the beginning, the preparedness and the early warning has to be there. It has to be collective preparedness program with early warning dissemination right down to the last man, last mile. Now for that, Disaster Management Center is developing our new systems for year 2022. So to cut short the timing, and I think we are almost reaching 3 hours, we have started our new concept of going GSM, relocating the towers right around the country, because if you get these 77 towers, there are quite large number of gaps. Utilizing the other installations right around the coastal line as locations, so whatever the resources for message conveying, then utilizing the other coastal line available existing tower systems. If you get as an example, we have the rail line right across along the coastal line. We have the this traffic light system. So utilizing all those things. So those are practical things we are trying to use that. Then getting the institutions adopting the advices and guidance given to them. Like now, as an example, if we get an early warning, okay, we say tsunami early warning has come, and we say, okay, there it is imminent. Will railway department stop the train plying from along the coastal line? So what is the mechanism for us to inform the railway department, okay, stop trains on the coastal line? And what is the mechanism to stop the train wherever it is, and to say people get off the train, go into the area? So these are practical things. Will the transport board stop the vehicle movement? Will the police do the seal off on the coastal line? Then what is the support by we have so many service providers, we'll say, I won't mention the name, but there are so many service providers on the cellular. We are quite large number. We had number of meetings with them, and I'm yet to see that solid results from all of them. Then we have number of these television networks. Then we have number of broadcasting networks. So we had couple of meetings. Now, we had couple of meetings. We discussed quite large number of things. We discussed a new thing called Tsunami Call. We discussed a new thing called Tsunami SOS. So if we implement all these dreams of disaster management center, getting everyone really involved, getting everyone, religiously getting into this subject, I'm sure we can reach last man, last mile.
Thank you very much, sir. And then, yes, of course, I remember in one session you were talking about this SOS message, and then you wanted that message to be someone hear that message even in a sleep, and that person to jump out of the bed and run for the safety. And then I would like to take that question to Mr. Asit. Is it possible, technically, is it possible to do that?
Waking you up from your sleep, that is possible. Already Dune caters to that. So if it's a very critical message, it will override all your phone settings. But having said that, this is on your smartphones, because Dune at the moment can be downloaded onto your smartphone, Android or iOS base. And it has the option, from the DMC, when you say this is a critical alert, it will override all the sounds and, all the settings. And it has the capacity to send out a large beep so that you will wake up and you can take action based on that. Yes. So that is a possibility to answer to that question. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asit. Then I would like to move to Dr. Hemantha Herath. So when can we move freely and then be free again? Is there any end to this pandemic, or else we have to live like this for a couple of years in the road as well?
Simple answer is, I don't know. Basically, we know very few things about the current pandemic. Still, it is evolving. So therefore, we need to at least to go on like this for another 1 or 2 years, because even though, in general principles, if even a disease is eliminated, we'll have to wait for another 3 years disease-free to ensure that it has been eliminated. So if you take that alone, there are plenty of time to go on like that. So therefore, I think what is required is to get ready to work or live with this pandemic for another few years. So therefore, again, I think what we need is to make sure our activities are modified in a manner so that we are going to do our normal activities and special activities or whatever the thing in the background of this pandemic, for which we have the basic guidelines like the distancing, wearing masks, and the washing hands, and all these things need to be carried out, even though the relative calmness or any reduction of cases and other things, because the relaxation of the things will not going to help at all, and that will be the beginning of another spike of diseases. So therefore, I think that is the answer. But before concluding my remarks, I just want to tell that working together is another important thing. We, from the health sector also, we need the support of others in the event of a tsunami warning, basically, because we have valuable resources to be mobilized probably from the affected areas, and health sector alone will not be able to evacuate them, at least vertically, even to upstairs. If you are having a expensive heavy duty generator, electric generator, we might not be able to get it to a higher level because of the weight of it, and we might not be able to move it without heavy machinery that can be moved it. So likewise, so we are now in the process of making those arrangements to move them in that manner. So for which I want to emphasize that we need to work together. Any department or sector cannot work alone. So in this type of situation, what is important is to work together to come out with the better results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And then with that note, as Major General Sudhanshu Ranasinghe said, if we had the opportunity to stop that train which is running towards the parallel, we could have saved 1,700 people without damaging that railway line. So with that, we have come a long way since 2004, and beautiful island nation Sri Lanka has taken many measures since then to become a tsunami-ready nation. And as Dr. Hemantha Herath said, without working together, without the support of all stakeholders, we are not going to achieve the goal of making 100% tsunami ready by 2030. I hope it will be a reality in the future by working together. Thank you very much. Chandana Siriwardana signing off from Sri Lanka. Thank you.